Hello and welcome to the Brew Hoop podcast. I'm Adam Paris, co-managing editor of brewhoop.com, and here to coronate the 50th episode of the Brew Hoop podcast as we don't do anything special and just continue with business as usual. I have Riley Feldman and Kyle Carr as per usual as well. So fellas, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good in honor of the 50th episode, even though I only found out 5 seconds before you hit the record button that this was the 50th episode. I was out until 1:30 in the morning DDRing it up at a local area Dave and Buster's. So I am in the right mindset, the right mood, and the right mental energy to really break down everything that's going on with Marvin Williams and beyond for the Bucks.
Yeah, and I have decided this weekend is a time to watch trashy reality shows and watching something called The Circle, which is basically Big Brother meets Tinder, and it's a competition. And I hate that I love it.
Banner weekend for all. Did anyone else play DDR and try and like use the DDR mats with their video games to play other games? Did anyone else ever try to do that and it
That was a
failed
thing.
miserably?
I think I went over to like a friend's house who did it, and I immediately left. I'm like, this is not happening. So that was the extent of my DDR mat to play Call of Duty experience growing up as a teenager.
I may have tried
Okay.
like the Guitar Hero controller one time, but I don't remember what game, but I think it was like a Guitar Hero controller that I tried doing that with.
Fair enough. I clearly had far too much time on my hands and had much more boring friends who wanted to try that stuff. But anyways, something that certainly wound up being a little more boring than I think we all would have hoped was the NBA trade deadline this week for the Bucks. Little bit of chatter this week, but nothing too crazy in terms of reported stuff that the Bucks might have been in on. I think we talked this last week, of course, about how we thought it might be a quiet deadline for Milwaukee. Certainly wound up being that way. No huge moves, I would say, across the league. The D'Angelo Russell for Andrew Wiggins one was pretty big. The Capella move that Houston made with four different teams was interesting just because of all the players that were involved with it, but no giant names moving in that one. But of course, we zero back in on the Milwaukee Bucks, who decide not to make a move at the deadline. There was reported interest in Markieff Morris. And of course, we find out later on that they do sign Marvin Williams on the buyout market, decide to waive Dragan Bender. But initially, Riley, what was your takeaway from Milwaukee basically standing pat at the deadline?
Yeah, if we separate the Marvin Williams and the Dragon Bender stuff off, just the trade deadline in general, I think everything that we had said the weeks leading up to, and even like months ahead of time, is it was going to always be difficult to find the right sort of match, especially salary wise, where, it kind of depends on how much they may or may not have known about Marvin Williams's situation. But assuming that they were that was maybe a little bit fluid, the difficulty was always going to be finding enough salary. And in order to do the salary, it was probably going to end up being Ersan. And if you get rid of Ersan and either like DJ or Sterling, then you might rob yourself of depth that maybe you're not using right now, but could be still theoretically useful in the near future in the playoffs, for example. And so, I think I can understand the Bucks feeling comfortable with where they're at with the roster they have, the difficulty in finding the right kind of deal. I'm sure they weren't reticent about moving the first if the right deal came along. So it's not so much that, but since they kept the pick, now they have the flexibility to either go and use that at the draft and actually draft somebody if they like somebody, or try and see if they can package that for another trade right before the draft as well. So there's a lot of different options, a lot of flexibility that they still have. And then we'll get into it as we go here. But the fact that they could then play the buyout market pretty confidently probably also helped reinforce the fact that they didn't need to force a trade that they may not have felt comfortable with, or if anything wasn't enticing out there. So not too surprising, but obviously I think everything ended up pretty well that you get a guy like Marvin Williams without having to pay in the form of, other assets for it. So pretty good overall, even if it was a little bit boring or a little bit of a fizzle at the trade deadline.
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, it's hard for us to know how much. I mean, just seemingly how quickly it played out. It certainly seems like they may have had this Marvin Williams things potentially in the work while the trade deadline was going on. But of course, we can't know that for sure. But Kyle, what was your takeaway, given that the Bucks decided not to make a move on the margins to shore up any of their depth anywhere at the deadline?
I was partially surprised, more because a guy like Sterling Brown or DJ Wilson was still there. I'm sure Horst was trying to shop one or both of those around just because Sterling Brown's going to be a restricted free agent and how much, and we don't know what his value is going to be in the summer. So that's always tough to figure out. And at the same time, you would want to try and make some type of upgrade. But I think when Robert Covington had gotten traded, I don't think there was really a concrete player that would have been an improvement. Maybe Markieff Morris, but at the same time, what are you giving up in that regard? So trying to make a deal was going to be difficult because your most likely trade pieces were Ersan, Sterling, and DJ, and Ersan is still valued in Bud's eyes, while Sterling and DJ have little to no value. So unless you use that Indiana first-round pick, which right now it's looking like it's going to be somewhere in the late teens, early 20s. So how much of an asset is that really at the same time? So I think it was just more of it depends on what was out there, but it didn't seem like there was much that the Bucks could have done, and without mortgaging their future or making a move that we would have sat here and questioned why they would have done in the first place. But it is interesting that they still have their first round pick. So now, are they going to try and move it at the draft night? Are they going to just keep it? That's something that I'm going to be intrigued about when we get to the summer.
I think it's important to talk. We'll talk about what some of the other people around the NBA did as well in the Bucks context in terms of that. But I think we do need to talk about the first round pick. Riley, I know I personally was sitting here last summer. I can't recall what everyone else's here stance it was on it, but I was one of those people who was like, I'm okay with the Brogdon move. It makes sense to recoup value. Having a pick like this potentially gets the Bucks, in the door if someone gets a little bit disgruntled with their situation. It gives them a little more leverage to be able to make a move. So I'd like to wait and grade the move until then. But in all reality, the thought process was that they would be able to make a move potentially to help them this year. And the reality is that they didn't. The move that they decided to do was to pick up bit pieces, fill in Brogdon that way. So we're essentially left with the first round pick will not be used to help the team this year, which is sort of our thought process going into the year. So I don't know what are your feelings on that at that point, given that the Bucks seem to have punted on using that as an asset to leverage themselves this year, and kind of contrasting that with what you were saying about, could the Bucks have made a move that maybe we would have maligned, but they felt the need to use the first round pick just because they had it and they wanted to push the chips in more this year.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think getting Marvin Williams and the fact that we don't know how he looks just yet, or how he's going to look over the coming months, that's what makes evaluating it so difficult, because I think I would be right there with you, where if they had stood pat and then they weren't able to get the kind of buyout guys they were looking for, like if the buyout guys they got weren't that compelling, that might be a problem. But we also, even like a week ago, we were talking, and I think a lot of people have talked up to the trade deadline, like, okay, what's the focus piece? What's the one area that the Bucks could really improve? And I think a lot of people agreed for the most part, or at least I think one of the areas of need was, what are we going to do about the Ersan minutes in case Ersan is not going to be compatible in a playoff scenario where the other team kind of just pick on him defensively? And so they went out and they used the buyout market to address that need, which would have been my biggest area of concern. And so I agree that it would have been obviously preferred to use the first round pick, but because they were able to get the buyout guy that they were looking for, and because he fits in so seamlessly with the one area of the rotation where it would have been like, I'm a little skeptical of that. I think I swing a little bit to the other direction here where, yes, it would have been nice. Yes, I think, ideally, if you could do the buyout guy and there's also a deal out there where you feel comfortable and say, we've upgraded here, then I would prefer them to push that. But I feel just kind of reading the situation, either through reports or just kind of the way that the team has played so far, I'm not sure if they felt the need to, or felt that there was going to be a viable situation where they could use that pick and recoup enough value to say, this is us going all in. Because given the guys who did move, none of them besides like maybe Robert Covington were super duper compelling or like a great fit. Maybe Markieff Morris might have been, a decent fit as well, given the way he's been shooting from three this year. But there's just not a lot of deals that look like they were out there that were going to make sense to utilize the first round pick. That's not just kind of like selling for pennies on the dollar just to use it, So I agree with you, and I think that's going to be the difficult part about this trade, and it's the difficult part about any trade, is you have to give it quite a while to actually see how it shakes out. to say who won this, was this a good move, et cetera, et cetera. But I think because of the Marvin Williams get, that reduces my angst or my frustration. And to be perfectly honest, once the trade deadline went past, having seen what was out there, I wasn't super upset about it. Like, especially with the trades that happened before, seeing what other contenders like Miami had to pay to get Andre Iguodala, for example, Philly picked up a couple of smaller pieces. There weren't many other moves by other contenders as well that maybe like, the Bucks are really missing out here. They really need to just find something or else, essentially. So I think for now I'm okay with it. We'll see what they do come draft time. But if they did the analysis and said there's nobody out there that's going to help us now, maybe this helps us out in the future if Giannis signs again, great. So I'm not too upset about it yet. We'll have to give it like another year to really figure it out.
Well, I'm interested because I was just listening to, I don't necessarily always agree with him, but I was like listening to Nate Duncan. He called the Bucks one of the biggest losers of the trade deadline, and I think that seems overblown. But like, for example, the kind of all-in move you're talking about, that doesn't feel super all-in to me, but maybe it's the kind of move that they should have made because it's all about this year and trying to win a championship this year. Is, I think, the closest corollary, Kyle, is the Marcus Morris move. I mean, I think the Bucks probably could have gotten him if they were interested and had a better package than the Clippers sending their pick. They could have packaged, maybe it's Urson and Wilson plus the Indy pick or whatever if they wanted Marcus Morris. But that it doesn't feel like a move that would fit what the Bucks want to do. And I also think am really curious. I think there's probably some trepidation on their part in terms of the chemistry and bringing someone like Marcus Morris in to disrupt what they have going here too.
Yeah, I definitely agree on the chemistry side. Because I know last year Giannis said that this team is doing well because they don't have any assholes, and Marcus Morris is 100% an asshole. So that would not have helped Milwaukee's chemistry in that aspect. And yeah, maybe they could have used that indie pick to get someone like Marcus Morris, but kind of like what Riley said, other than Robert Covington, I don't think there was a player out there that got traded or was quote unquote available that Milwaukee could have used that first round pick to necessarily make themselves better. But it does raise an interesting point of, you get rid of Brogdon, someone who would have helped this team, would have helped this team on the court, had the skill set, has the talent to make Milwaukee a very strong team. And you kind of decided you didn't want to pay, whether it was pay the repeater tax or luxury tax, whatever. You didn't want to pay it, so you decided to part ways with him. And yes, you were at least able to get a first round pick, but you would think that first round pick would have been used to make a move to improve the margins, just because right now for Milwaukee, you really don't have to make a move. I mean, this team's on pace to win 70 games, and it's kind of tough to necessarily make a move to improve that. But it's such, between winning a championship, like making the finals and winning a championship are thin margins, and getting to the finals is another set of thin margins that I think trying to upgrade would have helped, and using a first round pick would have been useful. But I guess I'm not as sour on it, because I'd rather Milwaukee, if they want to go all in going into 2020, 2021 year, they still have that first round pick, and maybe they can use that in a different package. And say Eric Bledsoe has another train wreck of a playoffs, well, you can maybe try and ship him off and get, some other player, like a different starting point guard. Or you lose Wes and Robin Lopez, and you can use that to get, another two guard. I'm not saying someone like Buddy Hield, for example. You could maybe try and get some kind of package to get someone like him as well. So I think it's more if you were trying to go all in, which I think John Horst is going all in by getting Marvin Williams off the buyout market, that's his indication of going all in and not necessarily feeling like he needs to pay 75 cents to get 50 cents in return. And he could just keep that, use that for the draft night, and maybe he'll upgrade in that aspect, or maybe he'll just draft another player that, in a year or two could come in and help right away. We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I do generally tend to agree with you guys. I just think it's important to try and look at it the other way. It's like, I mean, I think this was a good bit of business to sign Marvin Williams, not have to sacrifice assets. I don't think it's ever generally a smart move to overpay for a player. But I also don't know if making moves after the season, I mean, if they don't win the championship this year, maybe that means Giannis won't sign the Supermax. Are they going to make the moves again after this year? Like if Bledsoe has another bad playoffs, what's his value going to be like after this year with an improving salary? Granted, it's still not super high, but he'll definitely be the kind of guy who would be most realistic to move. Some of their veteran minimum guys, I mean, we'll have to see who will come after this year, but I don't know. I didn't think there was a great move out there for Milwaukee, but I mean, on some level, Riley, I really struggle with the idea of like, okay, well, at least we still have some assets for next year, potentially, if things don't go right. But I don't, I don't know. Maybe next year, everything could change within a year. I just have a really hard time, like, trying to balance that myself. Like trying to push all in how good this team is doing. Like, why am I still so afraid of like the postseason and how Milwaukee's going to do, despite the fact we're on pace for 73 wins?
Yeah, I think all of this, the issue with the discussion we're having right now is, excuse me, sorry. The issue with the discussion we're having right now is we're trying to evaluate it based off of the first round pick potential. And really what it all ties back to is the initial decision, like Kyle was saying, about Malcolm Brogdon. And so we've had to adjust the conversation because now the asset that is on hand is that first round pick. But there's also, as soon as you let Malcolm Brogdon go and you sign everybody else to the deals that you did, the difficulty is then you then are restricted per the way the CBA and the cap works from actually how you're going to generate a trade and bring in more reinforcements. And so I think I agree completely with your point that if, things fall short again this offseason, then we're going to have to relitigate everything. But I don't think it's going to be a relitigation of the first round pick. I think it's going to be yet again another relitigation on the Malcolm Brogdon debate. And, as much as everybody loves every single week being like, oh, look, Malcolm Brogdon hurt his foot again. He'd be doing that here too, I bet. For everything like that, or like doing direct comparisons for like a 10-game stretch of Eric Bledsoe versus Malcolm Brogdon. I think the issue isn't so much the role that Malcolm Brogdon has taken on in Indiana and like, oh, would he be able to do that here, et cetera, et cetera. The idea, again, as we talked about months ago and as we've talked since, you let that talent go. And yes, it was expensive talent, but there's a reason why talent is expensive, is because it's helpful for a team that's trying to win. And so I think your point about being, not miffed, but a little uncertain about them not moving that first round and then just rolling that forward and saying, oh, well, this is a good asset play down the road. Yeah, that's just kind of the logical conclusion of the decision that they made 6-7 months ago not to bring back Malcolm, and that the fact that they got a first round pick, like we've talked about, impressive, nice to have anyhow, but it all ties back into that initial decision. And again, the thing about the regular season is we can talk about what that guy is doing on another team now, but we're not going to have a real concrete idea whether or not the Bucks made the right or wrong decision until, May and June, and seeing, are we missing something there that, for example, having Malcolm Brogdon on the team would have brought. So I think that's the difficulty in trying to evaluate this trade deadline, is we're still dealing with the after effects of a move made months ago.
Yeah, it's a really smart point. And another team that tried to make some moves in the Eastern Conference for April, May, they would hope June, I guess. But Kyle, any thoughts on the Miami move, getting Andre Iguodala, Jay Crowder, and Solomon Hill, or Philadelphia getting showing up their bench with Glenn Robinson III and Alec Burks?
Yeah, I'll get to that. But I think the biggest surprise was, and I think the biggest benefit for Milwaukee, was that Boston and Toronto didn't make any moves. And especially Boston getting a guy like Clint Capella would have been a perfect fit for Boston to beat Milwaukee. Just imagining a pick and roll of Clint Capella and Kemba Walker would terrify the living hell out of me. So those two teams not making moves, I think, was the biggest benefit for Milwaukee. And because I think those are the two teams that I realistically think would give Milwaukee the biggest challenge. Miami getting Iguodala, Jay Crowder, and Solomon Hill. I mean, none of those guys really, I feel like, move the needle that much. I mean, Iguodala is 36 and has taken half a season off. Yeah, maybe he's a little bit more fresh going into the year, but at the same time, it's probably going to take him time to knock off the rust, and he's still 36. None of these guys, I feel like, are going to be moves that necessarily frustrate Milwaukee. The only thing that could happen is maybe Iguodala hits 4 or 5 threes off the bench, or Jay Crowder and Solomon Hill. Those are guys that maybe they come in, chip in 2 or 3 3-pointers, and that should help. While with getting rid of James Johnson and Justice Winslow, I feel like those were defenders that, especially James Johnson, gave Giannis fits. It gave Giannis a little bit of difficulty, and just how they played with the physicality. So I think those moves, not necessarily something that I don't think it helps Miami beat Milwaukee, but I think it helps Miami maybe get a 2 or 3 seed and avoid having to deal with Milwaukee until potentially Eastern Conference Finals. Philly, I guess getting Glenn Robinson in the third and Alex Burks was a good move, but I think we're also looking at the names and thinking that they're still really, really good players. I know Alex Burks was someone that was talented, was someone that was good. I feel like he's kind of fallen off the face of the earth. And we look at Glenn Robinson at third. He's been bouncing around multiple teams. And again, just based off his name, you think, oh, this is a good move for Philly. The fact that Philly didn't have to get rid of players necessarily and just had to get rid of picks is kind of helpful. But at the same time, this is more of Philly trying to fix their bench, but that's not the biggest issue with Philly. The biggest issue with Philly is they don't have a playmaker to help out Joel Embiid and Al Horford run on the floor or give Ben Simmons a little bit more leeway. That and the team is an incredible bunch of frauds on the road and cowards and softs. So
the usual disclaimers.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Well, we'll cap your point with that. Very helpful. I think, although I will say, like, seeing the 20 minutes or whatever that Shake Milton had to play in Josh Richardson absence the other night, I do feel like they could probably use a dude like Alec Burks. That is brutal for them. And it's also hard because those guys are on Golden State Warriors, and of course, given they're missing everyone, they're going to put up pretty big numbers. So that's helpful. The Miami move didn't really move the needle a whole lot for me. Andre Iguodala, Jay Crowder, it kind of feels like they, even though James Johnson wasn't really playing for them and neither was Justice Winslow, feels like they just slotted in different larger wings anyway. It feels like Miami is just able to pull those guys off the scrap heap regardless, and Spo coaches them up to become really competent defenders. So it doesn't, Iggy obviously will be like a really nice fit there and everything, but it doesn't move the needle drastically for me in terms of their ability to potentially face off against Milwaukee in the playoffs. I also didn't necessarily buy the, if they get Gallo, then they might be able to compete with Milwaukee narrative that seemed to come out of the trade deadline. I don't know, Riley, that just didn't really compute to me.
Yeah, I think once you get into that, once you're in trade deadline week, it's like everybody's in this weird hype vortex, where it's like, oh my God, dude, if they get Alec Burks, they might be able to get 3 championships right here. Every single player that gets moved, for the most part, especially when it's going to a contender, most people try to contort themselves into oh, this is why this move makes sense. So I get that that's just what people do. So I discount that a lot as well. But I think the idea was going to be, it's essentially at that point, it's like a talent acquisition, and you're just putting it up to, Spo will find a way to make it work. And maybe that's the case because obviously Spoelstra is a very, very good coach. So I agree that while looking on paper that Jay Crowder and Andre Iguodala don't look super duper impressive, there's still a possibility over the course of a series that Coach Spoelstra is able to find a way to make them not a little bit more impressive in the way that matters most over 4 games. And so I agree that if they had got Gallinari, it would have been interesting, I guess, because I think there were a lot of teams that would have liked Gallinari just because of the way that he plays. But at that point, if you're just kind of getting on the hype train of okay, well, they got Iggy, then they got Jay Crowder, they got rid of guys that they're not even playing anyhow. If they get this other guy that could play as well, that's even more on top. And so at that point, I think it's more so just the hype train, which again, totally understandable. It's just kind of the mood of the moment, but we'll have to see. I'm really interested when the Bucks, I have to look when they play the Heat next, but did we play them twice already this season? I can't remember off the top of my head. The Heat, I should say. I know we played them at the very start of the season, which was kind of fluky. I'm looking here.
I think they've only played them once.
Yeah, so we must play them once. Yeah, we play them twice more this season. So I think both of those, again, this is the Philly game earlier this week, which a little bit of a downer because it's right before the trade deadline or on trade deadline day. But I'm just going into it interested to see how does this matchup work, and is there adjustments that is being made by the other team now that they even have new talent as well that the Bucks are going to have to deal with. So that's what's interesting to me more than saying they did this X move, they're definitively or even higher odds now of beating the Bucks, because we don't really have a track record yet of seeing those two teams play each other as currently constructed.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think Kyle, your point also was well taken about Boston and Toronto and Indiana not really deciding to go all in. We saw last year a lot of the Eastern Conference contenders were making moves, whether it was Marc Gasol, the Tobias Harris trade, the Bucks obviously getting Nikola Mirotic. All of those kind of moves were those guys clearly thinking that they had a chance to win the championship. Certainly worked out for Toronto, did not necessarily work out for Milwaukee, as we all know. But interesting to see them kind of stand pat. But I think we've talked around it, but I think we should zero in and talk a lot more about this Marvin Williams signing.
Oh, I thought that was going to be your lead into the John Henson, Brandon Knight trade, but
well, we'll let you comment on that real quick, Riley, here. I know that's a big one for you.
It's, I had that bad boy circled the moment that it came across the Twitter wire. Whether or not it makes Detroit a better basketball team, I mean, the answer is obviously surely no. But I want to give them credit for doing everything that they can to try and channel into that or very early Giannis energy around Milwaukee, where it was like, we don't really know what this guy is capable of. Maybe he'll become one of the greatest ever. And it worked out for Milwaukee. And I think Detroit's strategy is, let's just get all the guys that was like around the team at that time and see if we can maybe I can't remember the name of their rookie right now.
Sekou Doumbouya.
Yes, Sekou Doumbouya. Maybe they're thinking, let's get the Giannis ecosystem around him and let's make that guy Giannis. And so I want to give a credit to the Pistons front office staff for playing 8D chess while the rest of us are playing checkers. So that's all I really wanted to comment there.
Thank you. Yes, but of course the 8D chess players who selected Henry Allen and Pride of Rice Lake or whatever completely washed out of the league. Kudos to them. But I do want to talk about Marvin Williams, Milwaukee Waves, Dragan Bender, which was pretty expected from all of us because obviously Thanasis has to stay on the roster. And Marvin Williams, longtime vet, been on the Hornets for about 6 years. Big sort of 3-and-D guy, 6'9", guy who we presume could play power forward. If you look at Cleaning the Glass, he's mostly been slotted in at power forward and a little bit of center for Charlotte this year. As we all know, Charlotte likes to play pretty small, as we've seen in all their matchups against the Bucks. Kind of marginalized given the Hornets' decision to go a little more youth-oriented this season. But he's a guy that can really shoot it from deep. He's 38% from three this year. Over his career, he's been really solid too. He's a guy who can offer seemingly a little more defensive versatility than Ersan is. He's just about the same age as Ersan's reported age.
I was going to say, is he?
He might actually be. He might be a little more spry even than Ersan. But I mean, this is a guy who shoots. If you look at in terms of the number of shots, his shot profile, I mean, it fits in perfectly with Milwaukee. 54% of his shot attempts have come from deep this season, 57% last year, 51% last year. So almost every year that he's been in Charlotte, he's basically taking half of his shots from beyond the three-point arc. So, I mean, Kyle, it seems like a very natural fit. What's like your sort of level of expectation for what we should expect from Marvin Williams?
I think he's going to be a very solid pickup for Milwaukee just because he's still, but like you mentioned, he's still shooting 40% from three. He's still very solid on defense. He's going to be someone that can come off the bench. He's going to be what everyone hopes DJ Wilson was going to be. And I think when Milwaukee plays a Miami or a Toronto, you can use him against Pascal Siakam and Bam Adebayo and even Miles Turner in Indy. Like, you can use him in those situations, or Sabonis, I guess. So I think that's going to be the best part is you have that athletic four that you can kind of allow Giannis to play at the five, similar to Ersan, just against more athletic forwards. And I think that was what one of Milwaukee's biggest issues last year is you had Ersan and you had Mirotic, both of whom are, let's just say, not great on defense. And I think it got exposed too many times to count. So having someone like Marvin Williams, who still has that athleticism and strength to keep up, is going to help Milwaukee. And like I said, it's also the 40% from three. And the fact that he's not going to any of the LA teams or somewhere else, another contender that could have helped Milwaukee, another contender that could have helped in their title chasing goes to Milwaukee, in which even if they don't use him as much, maybe still gives 10 minutes off the bench. That's better than expecting 20 minutes from Ursan.
I think so. If I can jump in on it, I think what's interesting about this is I think we probably shouldn't go into this saying like he's athletic in the way that like I'm some like I'm not going to claim I'm more athletic than Ursan because he's still an NBA player, but so I'm not going to go that far. But we're talking degrees here, where I mean this is still a guy who's 33. Obviously, I mean if you look at the minute load, I'd have to pull up how many minutes he's played, but he has a lot of minutes on those legs, which is fine. He's been in the league a long time. He's obviously a really good veteran, and like you were saying, he brings the 3-point shooting which we need. And I'm assuming, again, this is like every discount or disclaimer on most players. Like I haven't watched a ton of Hornets basketball this season, but I'm assuming he does have probably a little more in the tank athletically and just like either lateral movement or just sticking to a guy a little bit better than Ursan does. And so it'll be an improvement there. But I'm not sure going into it if I'm going to expect this to be like the shutdown guy, like, how we were all thinking 12 months ago that Thanasis was going to shut down Paul George in the finals. I'm not sure if Marvin is going to fill in that role potentially. I somewhat doubt it. So I'm not saying I expect him to be good. I'm not expecting really like great things like, wow, this guy is, I can't believe there's a reason why he got on the buyout market. Obviously a good fit for us, but it'll be the ultimate test to see what does Bud's system do for these guys in terms of jacking their numbers up? Because if you just do like just this season comparison, Ursan's playing I think 4 minutes less a game on average, and yet he's got like way higher rebound numbers, quite a bit more in terms of points, things like that, and even like per 36 numbers are a pretty big difference. And so I'll be interested to see, does Marvin now see like an uptick in his rebounding numbers because the way that the Bucks try to rebound? Does he see an uptick in his scoring numbers because, obviously the Bucks are this really dominant offensive force and the way that they get shots for their guys on the perimeter, and the fact that he is such a prolific shooter from there. And also, my final point would be, if you're looking just at the statistics to see, what does this guy look like within like a team concept defensively, you have to discount a lot of it because Charlotte has been a horrendous defense for like years now. I think they're the third worst defense in the league this year, and that's been pretty on point for most seasons the past couple of years. So, or at least his time with the Hornets as well. So I think it's interesting. A little bit of a question mark. I think he'll be an athletic improvement over Ursan, but I'm not expecting this guy to come in like really wow us night to night because I think that's unrealistic with how many miles he has on his legs already.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I pulled this from Tim McMahon on Twitter. The last buyout guy to play at least 100 playoff minutes for a title team was Peja Stojakovic on the 2011 Mavericks, which I don't even remember what he did on that team besides shoot some threes, occasionally rolling off screens and whatever. But I think you make really smart points about Marvin Williams. I'm curious how he would fit into the rotation. Will he be able to displace any Ursan minutes, who's seemingly played like a little less lately? And Ursan is also like one of Bud's favorite players, seemingly. So I'm very curious how he would fit in that way. Also, just a reminder that usually buyout guys like generally aren't that helpful. I know Ursan was really like that. It seems like that Ursan and Bellinelli year where they played on Philly has like jacked the value guys can be, but generally, I mean, they're like historically they aren't huge movers in terms of how teams are going to play or perform and changing how a team does overall. And also, I mean, obviously that Philly team didn't reach the summit or whatever; they just wanted a little depth. I am very curious to see how Marvin Williams fits in with the Milwaukee Bucks. Seemingly, he seems like a great fit. Shoots the three, able to play within a team defense conceptually. Maybe be able to move a little bit more laterally than Ursan Ilyasova. Gives you another option if you don't trust DJ Wilson in the playoffs. But I mean, this is also a guy who has not really been a part of teams that have played deep into the playoffs, at least as far as I can tell. I mean, he was on those Atlanta teams to start that, historically would always just get knocked off, the Joe Johnson Hawks or whatever. Then he's on Utah, and then God knows he's in Charlotte. So he certainly hasn't seen any crunch time minutes. So I think that's another factor. Yes, he's a veteran. which is great, but he hasn't really seen the kind of really high intensity playoff minutes. It's certainly not in the same way that Ersan has.
Well, and I think your point about him being this guy, did his time with Atlanta cross over at all with Bud's time? These are all research points that I probably should have looked up beforehand.
I don't think so, because his last year was 2011-12, and I think Bud was later.
Yeah. Well, so ignoring that then, so I think it is interesting where we've talked about in the past where it's like the issue with Budenholzer is he loves running a 16-man rotation deep into the playoffs. So like my question then is, we know that, like you said earlier, Ersan is like one of his guys, understandably so, because Ersan is still doing the damn thing this deep into his career. But I think we've talked about in the past where one of the concerns regarding Budenholzer is he able to make the decisive move to put or like shorten up the rotation or to put a guy in when like the situation calls for it? Is he going to be willing to pull the levers and move things around, or is he kind of going to fall back and be like, well, Marvin's struggling a little bit out there, so let's just put Ersan in to see how it works? Like, is he going to experiment negatively in that way? So yes, it's helpful in that your talent level for the roster took a slight step forward, but there might be a little bit of a drawback in that it gives Budenholzer another button to push. And it seems like he's reticent to push a lot of buttons most of the time, which is fine because, as we talked about, the team's really good. But I do question that a little bit where, maybe it's not one single game in a playoff series, but maybe over the course of a playoff series, is he going to be able to, in his own mind, be able to figure out what the right combination is and who to play when and what the minute allocation is when he's got this new guy who might on paper be better than Ersan, but he might feel more comfortable with Ersan in a certain spot. And so that's something I'm a little concerned about as well, where you don't get rid of any of the depth, where you're forcing Budenholzer to play Marvin Williams. You're just giving him more options. And so does that kind of force miscalculations or make the calculations a lot more difficult for him to do in tight situations?
Yeah, how do you think those minutes might bounce out, Kyle? I mean, Mirotic came in and was able to get a decent amount of minutes, and Bud sort of went with some supersized lineups last year. But how do you think Bud might try and play those minutes, at least initially, between Ersan and Marvin?
I think he'll still give Marvin Williams, 5-10 minutes of run just to see how things are going early on, and then maybe as it gets near the end of the season and the eventual first round sweep of whoever they play, he'll maybe get up to that 15-20. But I don't think he's going to get more than 20 minutes per game unless Ersan is injured or one just plays himself out of the rotation, which I don't see happening necessarily. Maybe instead of giving some minutes to Pat Connaughton, it goes to Marvin Williams. And maybe instead of Robin Lopez getting 15 minutes, you give some. I think he'll just start. It's not necessarily going to come from Ersan Ilyasova necessarily, but it might come from a Pat Connaughton, a Marvin Williams, even a Kyle Korver, where he might take a couple of their minutes and get up to that 10-15 range.
Yeah, just jumping in real quick. So the one corollary that we do have is when Mirotic came last season, because that was, again, like the same position that Ersan played. Now, I'd have to go back and remember if Ersan was dealing with any sort of injury issues, but when Nikola came, first 4 games as a Buck, he did not play. I think he was still dealing with a little bit of an injury. And then he went against Boston, about 14 minutes. Next game, 18 minutes, 22 minutes, 26 minutes, and kind of stayed within the 22-ish range minutes per game. And so I think we can point to that and say we have at least somewhat of a history of if they get this upgrade. And obviously that was a little different because that was a trade acquisition rather than a buyout guy. But I am curious. I think there is a chance that Budenholzer might just give them the keys right away and see how that works. Just they can even spin it to say, like, this is Ersan getting like a break for a couple of weeks as we try to integrate this guy. So maybe that's the other direction to go. So it could go really either way at this point.
Yeah, I also think even George Hill is out now, but I think you make a good point, Kyle. I mean, we're getting a lot of Kyle Korver minutes, like every night.
So many.
Right. And this is a guy who last year basically couldn't play for the Jazz in the playoffs. They basically benched him. So I think we should definitely keep an eye on that and see if Marvin Williams is a guy that they try and stick in and get a little more size out there, because even if you look at like the playoff minutes between Ersan and Nikola, I mean, Ersan played in every single playoff game, averaged anywhere from like 11 minutes to 22 minutes to 25 minutes, but it was usually within that range. And Nikola Mirotic, as we all know, played in just about every playoff game except for the last one. And after they like ramped him back up for the Detroit games, he was basically anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes in every single game, except for the last 2 games against Toronto. So like that's a lot of minutes that he was playing for this Milwaukee team last year. So I really think that Kyle Korver could be some of those minutes that they would take. I really don't think that Pat Connaughton is going to have a place in the rotation come playoff time, just given the fact that when George Hill was really cruising out there with Dante DiVincenzo as well, there wasn't really a place for Pat Connaughton. I mean, he fits in, he does stuff, all that kind of, jazz and everything. But I just think defensively, teams are going to attack Pat Connaughton. Teams are going to attack Kyle Korver, especially zero in on him game after game after game. And he's a guy who maybe you should look for even more so than Ersan, because teams might zero in on Ersan, but you're going to need to try and find and shore up these defensive weak links that our teams are going to attack specifically in the playoffs. I don't know. Any other closing thoughts on trade deadline or buyout moves, Kyle?
I think lately, I feel like in the past few years, the trade deadline hasn't brought as many big name moves just because you either do it in the summer or teams are trying to value their first round picks and younger players more than they ever did in the past. So I feel like trade deadline is starting to get a little bit too overrated in terms of how we approach it and think it's going to be this massive chaotic time period where it's like, it's relatively fine. I think the July 1st, like beginning of free agency, has now surpassed trade deadline in terms of I can't not be by my phone when this happens type of thing.
My final question before we wrap up on this, I know you said earlier, Adam, that we pretty much expected Dragan to be the guy. Is that still the case? Like, do you guys have a preference? Was there somebody else that you would have rather get the cut, or do you think that was the right move?
I think just given like I believe he was not guaranteed for next year, and like Thanasis is guaranteed. I think just given the financial state of the team, it makes the most sense to cut him. And I mean, he was a great flyer or whatever, but he was never going to make a meaningful contribution to this team. So I'm kind of fine with it.
Yeah, that was my thing too. Everyone was like, "Oh my god, I can't believe we just got rid of this guy. We got that cheap deal next year, and he was going to be our Robin Lopez replacement." Which, I mean, if that's the case, we're dead in the water in the first place anyhow. But I agree that the fact that he wasn't going to contribute this year, and there's still a reality where Sterling could potentially, and DJ, you don't want to eat that dead money. I agree that Dragan was the odd man out.
Yeah, you didn't want to take the dead money that came with DJ Wilson. Sterling Brown, if it gets to the point where he's forced into rotation minutes, then yes, the Bucks are in trouble regardless, and Drogbender's not going to help it. And you can find a Robin Lopez replacement for a low cost. That's how they found Drogbender in the first place. I mean, you just got to look at, I don't know, what's Skal Labissiere doing? Something like that, you could easily just give the same type of contract and it'd be fine.
Plus, maybe it looks good for the Bucks for other guys, like you're saying, who might be looking for a flyer, just like a buy low guy where, hey, you can go to Milwaukee and they'll develop you, or they'll really showcase you with the G League team. And I mean, I don't know if he's officially been waived yet or what the situation is, but maybe it looks good as well that there are guys who can, show out or look positive under Bud's system and maybe get another chance at another look at another team. So.
Yeah, well, we bid a fond adieu to you, Dragan. Thank you for taking DJ's minutes and stirring up controversy for a few games here. We ourselves are going to take a quick break, and on the other side of it, we'll talk about some of the games from this past week, mainly focusing in on that 76ers game. So stay tuned. All right, we are back, guys. And so we had a couple games this past week: Suns, Pelicans, 76ers, the Magic. The Suns game obviously was the day we Super Bowl Sunday. We recorded that morning, so we didn't touch on it. I'm just going to say briefly: Bucks win 129-108. Giannis scores 30, has 19 rebounds, 9 assists, 25 points for Chris, 8 rebounds, 6 assists for him. Lopez, 17 points, 7 of 16 from the field. Got a few chances to work inside early when the Suns were not really putting a big upon him, which was kind of nice to see the Bucks go to that mismatch. But I mean, overall, I think certainly went I wouldn't say according to script because the Bucks haven't shown really a propensity to look spectacular in early afternoon games this year, but I mean, generally what we would have expected, and a nice bit of revenge, Riley, after Phoenix beat us twice last year.
Yeah, I was sweating it out a little bit because they're buck killers, those Phoenix Suns. I think what was the one notable thing from that game, like I said, was kind of per usual for the Bucks, but I think what was interesting and is kind of, again, instructive for other teams potentially was Devin Booker out there. Like, he goes 9 of 15, he gets to the free throw line 13 times, etc., or for 13 free throws. It was interesting watching him in the flow of the Phoenix offense because he has such like a probing way that he handles the ball and kind of attacks defenses where he doesn't overcommit to one certain move early in the shot clock. He's just kind of like moving around, trying to manipulate defenses. And I think he did a pretty good job of manipulating the Bucks' like drop zone scheme to find other guys around him to like try and get better shots at the rim. Now, unfortunately for him, those guys were like Kelly Oubre, who went 5 of 20, and Ayton, who went 10 of 27. So not exactly the best finishers or the best, results to those sorts of passes. But we've seen time and time again where a guard who has the patience and kind of the IQ to keep an eye out and really manipulate the Bucks defense, it can be a kind of touch and go for Milwaukee. And in this case, again, I think it's a talent thing, and they end up playing to their strengths and get the win anyhow. But I thought that was kind of the one interesting thing from that game. But
Yeah, certainly. Always good to see different players and see how they're able to bend Milwaukee's defense, test them in different ways. Next one, of course, this week we had 2 primetime games this week. The first of which was a 120-108 victory over the New Orleans Zion Pelicans. Giannis scores 31 points, 16 rebounds, again 9 assists. 20 points for Chris Middleton, 8 rebounds, 8 assists, 9 of 18 from the field. Every starter hits double digits in that one. Bucks lead in the points in the paint category, 60-40, 33-14 on fast break points. Kyle, the most interesting thing for this was watching Zion go for 20 points, just 5 of 19 from the field, and really watching Zion go up against Giannis in this one. Weird play aside, where Zion like steals the ball from Giannis, and then everyone's like loses their mind about it. What any key takeaways from this one, Kyle?
It was interesting just because early in the game, New Orleans was getting pretty hot from 3. I think Lonzo Ball had started 3 of 3 or 3 of 4. The 3-point line. Brandon Ingram has continued his fantastic play this year. They just had shots falling for them, which was good for them because, if you get the shots and you hit them, great. You can't really, and it wasn't like Milwaukee's defense was poor like it was in the San Antonio Spurs loss or the Philly loss. It was just a matter of they were just hitting tough shots and some decent ball movement, and you can't really do much about it. But once those shots stopped falling for New Orleans, that's when Milwaukee was able to break away in the game, and it's evident with the 33 fast break points. Milwaukee was definitely playing with a little bit more speed at the beginning of the second half. So the score was relatively closer just because New Orleans had the hot start, and I think it was the end of the third quarter, beginning of the fourth quarter. They were playing pretty well, and Milwaukee was, I wouldn't say being lackadaisical, but you could definitely tell they were taking their foot off the gas at various points in the third quarter, which Giannis mentioned in the post-game interview as well. In terms of watching Zion, I enjoyed watching him play just because, we've waited almost all season for him to have this kind of impact, and we weren't sure what he was going to be. A guy that size, able to move that fast and jump that high and kind of defy physics, it seems like. It's very fun to watch, and especially him skying in for rebounds and doing whatever it takes to dunk on people. And I think that's kind of the cool part. Obviously, he's going to need to refine his game a little bit more, try a little bit less, not necessarily less, but he doesn't have to dunk it on everyone all the time, I guess is the one I would go for. But it was interesting watching Giannis guard him because I think Giannis is one of the few players in the league that has the size and strength to stay with him. And you can tell Giannis had a couple blocks at him, able to frustrate him, hence the 5 of 19 from the floor. That was, between Giannis and Brook Lopez, and it was also evident in the Philly game as well that their paint defense was the key part that stood out and why I was able to frustrate him so much. So I think Giannis handled that task pretty well. I think Wes Matthews also deserves a shout out. He had a pretty good defensive game as well. And it was just one of those where Milwaukee was able to get its baskets relatively easy, and it was just a matter of New Orleans hitting a lot of shots at the beginning that made this game a little bit more tense around halftime, and then when it got to the third and fourth quarter, it was just more ho-hum normal stuff from Milwaukee.
Yeah, impressive stuff from Brandon Ingram basically throughout the game. I think he had 32 points, so that was a really quality game from him. But yeah, I'll tend to agree on all points. Zion is very interesting to watch him like a bowling ball out there. It'll be really curious to see him be able to figure out a way to more fine tune his motor so he knows when to rev up and rev down, as opposed to just going like 3 million miles an hour on every single play. Also, I've never seen a guy who like every time he is just walking, he looks like he's limping. I wonder if he has like a leg that's shorter than the other. I don't know. But he always has like a weird gait to him as he's just walking around on the court. But
and he looked gassed.
Yeah,
by the third and fourth quarter, he looked exhausted, and he wanted to keep playing, but he definitely conditioning wise is not like regular season game ready.
It's like that. Yeah. It's like that one meme of those two really jacked dudes like doing the handshake or whatever, and it's like player X and player Y agreeing on one thing. It's like Joel Embiid and Zion Williamson agreeing to be gassed 10 minutes into the game. Like that's what that equivalent is essentially.
But I'll give Zion a pass because being injured and stuff. Joel Embiid just comes in camp out of shape.
Speaking of Embiid and the Sixers,
well, Embiid and Nikola Jokic have that common thing, right? Actually, that's the perfect meme for it. Embiid and Jokic showing up to training camp out of shape.
Playing yourself into shape over the season.
Very, very true. And thank you for the delightful segue. Riley, let's move into the marquee game from this past week, the 112-101 victory over the 76ers. Milwaukee gets revenge for that Christmas Day game. Interesting how this one played out. I'll just go over some of the box score stuff real quickly. Giannis, 36 points, 20 rebounds, 6 assists, 13 of 25 from the field. Really took it to Embiid and all the Sixers defenders, whoever decided to guard him the entire evening, almost exclusively. He did his scoring inside the paint. Chris Middleton, 20 points. Eric Bledsoe, 14 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists. I wanted to highlight Robin Lopez here. 9 points in 19 minutes. I thought he did an excellent job filling in for his brother Brook, who was in foul trouble. Milwaukee frustrates Embiid almost the entire evening, just 19 points for him, 11 rebounds, but that's on 6 of 26 shooting. So really impressive stuff from there defensively for Milwaukee. Horford, 15 points, 5 of 17 overall, 5 of 12 from deep, basically the same strategy that they used while he was in Boston. I think the interesting thing here, Riley, is, in terms of Philly, from three-point land, they shoot pretty similar to what they did on Christmas, 19 of 45, 42.2%. Milwaukee shoots a little bit better, 12 37, 32.4%, but the Bucks still win by 11, so relatively handily, even if the game was close for the majority of it.
Yeah, I'm pulling out the box score from the Christmas Day game because I think, I think the key difference is we're seeing in this past game, this past week, Joel Embiid plays pretty awfully on the offensive end. He's still a force on defense. And, for most of the game, it was pretty much a grind for Milwaukee. Like even deep into the third and fourth quarter, it was still relatively close, like still stuck in the 80s and 90s, whereas we're used to the Bucks, approaching 100 plus points a game with pretty rapid speed. And so if I go back then to the Christmas Day game, the difference there looks to be like Joel Embiid ends up going for 31 points, 3 of 6 from 3. Tobias Harris, he doesn't have to take nearly as many shots, and he's more efficient. And so even though the Sixers did shoot pretty much as well from 3, and probably outside of their character to shoot that well from 3, but I think what's interesting is it really revolves around whether or not Embiid has it going on a night-to-night basis, because when he doesn't, the Bucks kind of do what other teams could potentially do to guys like Brook Lopez, the way that he's shooting right now, or like Eric or even Giannis, where you just leave them alone on the 3-point line, and that kind of clogs things up even further. Whereas if you're a team who sort of honors Joel Embiid out there, that obviously opens things up just enough for them to be able to use the rest of their personnel to get better baskets. Whereas, poor Tobias Harris, obviously not that poor financially, because that dude's making bank. Shout out to that guy. But every single time he tried to make anything happen offensively, it seemed like he ran into 7 to 8 bucks. Like that's how many defenders were all over him. And so there was no such thing as a clean look. And so when that's the case, if you can just almost totally discount Joel Embiid because you have a guy like the Lopez brothers botting him up and making it difficult for him, that makes life so much easier for everybody else. It forces the Sixers, who already have a stop and go like molasses like offense, slows them down even more and gives you enough space to be able to over time, even if it is a grind for yourselves, you're still the better offensive team and you can execute a little bit better. And shout out to Bud as well. Like you were saying with the matchups with Lopez out there, I do want to give credit to the fact that Budenholzer seemed to have changed the rotations on the fly to say, okay, we got to get Giannis these rest minutes while Embiid is out there. Robin, you go out and you body up Embiid and you do the best to help us survive these like next 3 or 4 minutes. And for a team that's already like the Sixers, that's already pretty shallow in terms of rotation depth or useful rotation depth, I think you lose those like 3 minutes of productive play from Embiid where it's just a little subpar, and all of a sudden, the Bucks obviously go out and get the win at the end. So I thought it was pretty impressive from top to bottom, even though I don't think it convinced me that a series against the Sixers would be a breeze. I think it'd still be a knockdown drag out fight, which would be pretty brutal for everybody involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you flip this around and you're looking at it from Philly's perspective, which apologies in advance, they might say, well, Embiid went 6 of 26, lost by 11. Al Horford 5 of 17, we only lost by 11. I mean, we'll take that. We still played really well against Milwaukee. I think where Milwaukee really had success, I mean, holding them to 33% shooting inside the arc, 18 of 54 overall is really impressive. But it is what Milwaukee wants to do. That's their game, is stopping people from scoring inside. And I did want to highlight again, Kyle, just the fact that Bud would take out Giannis and just say, all right, Robin, Brook is out. It's your job to basically put a body on Embiid, keep him frustrated, keep him from being able to score. There's a part here at the end of the first, start of the second, where Giannis isn't out there. It's basically Robin just like doing his best to stop Embiid. And I just thought his minutes were huge. And then when he hit 2 threes, I mean, that was just icing on the cake.
Yeah, and you could say yes, Embiid played this poorly and Al Horford played this poorly and lost by 11, but it really doesn't fully tell the story of how bad Philly looked interior defensively. And Milwaukee shot piss poor from 3. They were 12 of 37, and they still were able to comfortably. It was a comfortable win. It wasn't, since after halftime, it was a comfortable win for Milwaukee. So I guess I'm not in that mindset of, Embiid and Horford play that poorly. The Bucks did exactly what they wanted to do, and that was force Embiid and Horford in particular to take those 3-point shots. Embiid and Horford combined to go 8 of 22, which if that's going to happen, that's totally fine. And it still doesn't explain how Philly doesn't have a solution to stopping Giannis in the paint. It still doesn't stop Philly from letting Chris Middleton catch fire in the second half. It's still a lot of these things where Milwaukee played the game that it wanted to, and that is why they were able to get the comfortable win that they did. And Philly's kind of looking at their bench really didn't contribute much other than Korkmaz, who I think he had 12 of the team's 20-something points. So for me, it was just more of the Milwaukee's defense was fantastic, especially on Joel Embiid. They frustrated Philly. They stymied Philly. Again, only getting 33% from inside the arc. I think that's what Milwaukee would want, is for Philly's poor shooters to take as many of those shots as possible. You're going to have days like the Christmas day where maybe they'll hit those and there's nothing more you can do about it. But at the same time, you can have something like Philly, like tonight, where they still hit a good chunk of threes, still shooting 42%, but you don't allow them to get points in the paint. You don't allow them to get to the free throw line too much. You don't allow them to defensively impose their will on Giannis. Giannis is able to kind of just breeze through, get him beat on a couple post moves. Brook Lopez was able to defensively at least just kind of stand tall even when he was in foul trouble. Yeah, shout out to Robin Lopez. I think that was his best game in a Milwaukee Bucks uniform. He was even able to hit a couple threes just to add to it. And I think Bud saw that and went a little bit smaller because Ersan only played 7 minutes. Brook Lopez, because of foul trouble, played 25. So he went with a lot of center Giannis lineups. And I think that was really the difference, is Milwaukee was able to just go and run. And when you have Embiid and Horford, they can't keep up with that speed. And the fact that Philly mentally is just pathetic on the road.
And The other thing that I would note, besides being pathetic on the road from Philly, I want to give a shout out to Chris as well. Where how much did he shoot? I think he was 8 of 17. Yeah. Even though it wasn't, I mean, relatively efficient, almost 50% from the floor. What was really impressive was Ben Simmons was the guy who was guarding him for the most part, and as much as we can all clown on Ben Simmons for not shooting threes or anything further from like 3 feet from the basket, he still is a really good defensive player given his athleticism and size and length. And so there was a chance that Chris, multiple times there would be like a pick, Chris would try to get around it, and then Ben Simmons be like all over his back or right around him. And there would be times in the past where I think we could see Chris in that situation pass out or try and defer to somebody else because he doesn't want to try and take over, or he's just not feeling that aggressive. And in this game, multiple times where even with Ben Simmons sort of contesting him, it was a good enough shot, even in the mid range, for Chris to feel comfortable and try to stay aggressive, which is what we've asked for. And so if you're going to be looking for games and say, this is like the difference for Chris Middleton this year versus even a year ago, stuff like this, where he has a defender on him and he still takes it on his own shoulders to try and make offense happen. So it doesn't become a one way, just like everything runs to Giannis, let the wall build sort of situation. I think that was really effective as well and helpful for Milwaukee.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point. I mean, you could see Chris Middleton basically getting guarded by Ben Simmons, like almost out to the logo at half court. He was really trying to crowd him. And we all know that Chris isn't exactly like the most athletic guy, but he certainly has such a patient repertoire of moves that he can break out to just slowly, methodically work to his spot and find where it is that he wants to go. And you make a very, very smart point that in the past, maybe he would have gotten frustrated and not continued to go for that, but all credit to him for doing so. One other thing I want to touch on is this was the first chance basically that we've gotten to see Eric Bledsoe face off against Philly in the last 2 games. He was hurt Christmas Day, and then the last year in Philadelphia, obviously he whipped a ball at some dude's head and got kicked out of the game right away.
An act of violence.
Oh, that's right. Yes, a very violent act. Being in the crowd that night, it seemed very violent. The crowd was upset. But it goes for 14 points, 6 assists, 8 rebounds, 6 of 14 from the field. Felt very much like an Eric Bledsoe game. Couple of boneheaded plays in terms of he always seems to, seemingly every game, he likes to jump in the air and just like toss the ball back to a space where maybe someone is, but no one always is on the Milwaukee team. Like I almost feel like he needs to remember where the blue squares are a little more often in terms of trying to find Milwaukee players when he jumps in the air. But still, I mean, all credit to him. I mean, he's the kind of guy who is going to need to find his place against a Sixers team that plays really, really big. He's more of a jitterbug guard, a guy who can try and get inside, and it's tough to finish against the length that Philadelphia has. But major kudos to him for still putting in 14 points and 6 assists, 8 rebounds. That's a line not to sneeze at. So all credit to him. All right, let's move on briefly to the 112-95 win over the Magic, which Riley, you were up early crunching game tape for this one after your exploits last night. So I'll let you take the first lead on major takeaways from this one.
Look, I'm not going to say I have to take the Bucks film room mantle from Brian. I'm not going to go that far because I did get up and watch the game after, 2 a.m. DDR, got up at 7 a.m. to get this film in. So the dedication is there. I'm not nearly as much of an expert, though. I thought watching the game, skipping through, what I do when I watch these is I just skip the free throws because who cares, like whatever at the end, or like dead ball situations. What jumped out to me was, especially in the first half, I was really impressed with what Giannis was doing from a passing standpoint. Now, there were stretches where his teammates weren't making the shots actually go in, but there were so many times where Giannis drives and even before he makes contact, where we've seen in the past, he like makes contact, runs into the wall, stumbles a little bit, and then tries to pass out of it. He was a lot more decisive where he takes 1 step, 2 step, and then finds a guy with like some sort of zip pass. And more often than not, that would end up in an assist for him. So I thought that was impressive from him, especially in a game where this is the first time all season that he didn't take a single 3. And so if he doesn't have that going for him, even if the team is going to then afford you so much space, if you choose not to do the 3, then you have to be ready and able to be a really crisp passer to try and tack, get everybody to suck in on you, and then go for it, which you talked about before. But I thought this was a really good execution on his part there. And I think what was most notable was, and we talked, Kyle, you said this before we started recording, was there was a stretch in the third quarter where the Bucks they were like scoreless for 5 straight minutes, like they had 12 or 13 possessions without a single basket, and eventually the Magic were able to reel it into like a 9-point game, and yet even after all that, you go 5 minutes where the Magic are really hitting and you're not, you still have like a 14 to 10 point lead after all that. So it felt pretty much over after the second quarter. The Magic made it somewhat interesting in the third, but I don't know if it was anything they were doing specifically. There was like a lot of, like you're saying with Eric Bledsoe, some nights he's really good at finishing around length and contact at the rim. Against the Magic, a little bit less so. It seemed in some situations where he ends up on the ground a lot, which is pretty par for the course. But there were times where either from 3 or trying to get inside, it seemed a little shaky at times. Actually, I'm checking over it right now, and it looks like 7 of 16 and 5 from 3. So actually 7 to 11 from inside. So maybe I'm not a Bucks film room expert because I missed all that. So take back everything I said about Eric Bledsoe. It's just, again, it feels like another situation where you out talent them. They made it somewhat interesting in the third, but otherwise the most notable thing was Giannis was doing some good passing. So
I think the other thing, Kyle, is Brook Lopez kind of finally looking like Splash Mountain again. 5 of 5 from deep, 23 points. That's his season high, I believe. 9 of 13 from the floor overall.
And Wes early too. I should jump in. Sorry, Wes also did 4 from 3. So those two guys, I should give a shout out to that they did pretty well from outside.
Yeah, Milwaukee shot 39% from 3, which was probably the best they've done in a long time, it feels like. But Orlando shooting 25% also helped, and maybe Brook Lopez just had to make a trip to Splash Mountain, and we'll see if Robin Lopez did any more petty theft while they were down there. But it was one of those games where in the second quarter, Milwaukee went on a run, kind of like the mid to late of the second quarter, which kind of blew the game open. But then at the 6-minute mark, Chris Middleton hits a 3, or no, it was like the 6 minute or like 5.5 minutes. Brook Lopez hits a 3, and that was at 5:24 in the third quarter. And Milwaukee did not make a single basket until, oh my goodness, when was the last time? It took until, I think, near the end, because I know that, it was until a couple of seconds into the fourth quarter where they got an alley-oop, and that was the first field goal that Milwaukee had made in over 6 minutes of play. Eric Bledsoe had a couple free throws near the end. So after all that happened, Orlando still didn't really get the lead down significantly despite all that, and I think that was just more of what Milwaukee's doing. Eric Bledsoe in particular, he just looked the most athletic. He looked like the fastest guy. He looked like the strongest guy on the court. Just his athletic ability is really what stood out with Giannis's passing and Brook's shooting. But Wes Matthews, again, hitting threes is always good. Chris Middleton, again, just still being consistent as he can be, getting 13 rebounds. That's got to be a season high for him as well. And I think Milwaukee's bench really did not do anything to help them. And I think that's what shocked me the most. Kyle Korver has a struggle from the 3-point land. Pat Connaughton tries his best to do stuff, but that doesn't always help. It was mainly Milwaukee's starters were significantly better than the entire Orlando Magic team. And it seemed like when 1 or 2 of the starters went out, that's when Orlando would make its run.
Yeah, I mean, Bucks lead from wire to wire in this one. And I think the closest, besides it being tied 0-0, it was also 23-22 at some point. But the out-talenting them is, as I'm just like looking up and down, if I'm a Magic fan and the Bucks are up by like 26, and it's like, all right, well, let's see if Bamba, Michael Carter-Williams, and Gary Clark can cut into this lead at all. That is just so depressing. I feel bad for them.
You're pretty much hoping Terrence Ross literally he ascends to godhood right there on the court. That's essentially your plan at that point, which luckily for Milwaukee, he still gets 20 points, but he did not go even further than that. So
yeah. All right, let's move on, guys. Let's talk just a little bit of All-Star weekend primer. So real quickly, I'm gonna give you the 2 All-Star teams, Team LeBron, Team Giannis, and I want you to grade it on a scale from F to A+. So Team LeBron is LeBron, AD, Kawhi, Luka, James Harden for the starters, and then Dame Lillard, Ben Simmons, Jokic, Tatum, Paul, Westbrook, Sabonis for the reserves. Team Giannis, Giannis, Embiid, Siakam, Kemba Walker, Trae Young for the starters, Chris Middleton, Bam Adebayo, Rudy Gobert, Kyle Lowry, Brandon Ingram, Donovan Mitchell for the reserves. Kyle, how would you grade Giannis's All-Star draft F to A?
I would give it a B. His picks for the starters were really good. Joel Embiid, Pascal Siakam, Kemba Walker, and Trae Young, all good picks. I thought he was going to take Luka, or Kawhi, one of those two, because we knew he wasn't. We knew LeBron was going to take Anthony Davis. So what Giannis did after that was going to be interesting. So I think his starters are good. His reserves weren't too bad. He did the obligatory, I got to pick my teammate first overall. And then getting guys like Bam Adebayo and Brandon Ingram along with Donovan Mitchell, they can get hot and they can go on a run on their own. Rudy Gobert, I mean, it's whatever. It's the All-Star game, so Rudy's best skill in defense is going to be applicable. And then Kyle Lowry, the guy that can hit 2 or 3 threes in a row. So I'd give it a B. I liked his starters picks. His reserves could have left more to be desired.
If I was to give it a grade, my grade is I really don't give a damn because it's the All-Star game. I
don't care, but if I had to give a letter, I guess I'll just give it a B. I don't want to be super critical.
Yeah, I don't want to kick dirt all over your exercise, Adam. But like to me, I really couldn't care less. And anybody who's like, "Oh my God, Giannis would make an awful GM." I mean, come on, bro. Are we really doing that for content right now? Is that our lead up? And so the only thing I have to note was shout out to Giannis for mocking James Harden for not passing, but then also picking Trae Young, which I can guarantee you is not going to pass the ball during the All-Star game. So that's really the only takeaway I have. Otherwise, I'm sure it'll be an All-Star game that I will not tune into. So it'll be good times.
Also, we have to give a shout out to Giannis for throwing shade at Ben Simmons and the Russell Westbrook trade because I think someone asked him and he said, well, I'm not going to make a trade because the last time he did that, it kind of screwed me over in regards to him trading Ben Simmons for Russell Westbrook. And then Russell Westbrook missed 20 shots in a row, costing Giannis his team to win and him getting the All-Star MVP.
Fair enough. All right, I give Giannis a C. Next one.
Okay, great. That's threading the needle between B and I don't give a damn, so that feels appropriate.
Okay, so we also have Chris Middleton in the skills competition, Pat Connaughton in the dunk contest. Very good representation for the Bucks this year. Riley, any thoughts on? I know you feel very strongly about the All-Star weekend. So, any thoughts on either of those guys in their respective competitions?
So, no, I mean, I can. If you are of the gambling persuasion, which that's for certain people, I would hammer whatever the odds that Pat Connaughton places fourth. I would hammer those. Like, just put all your money, put the mortgage on that bad boy, because there is no way on God's green earth he's doing better than fourth place. In regards to Chris, it feels like every year the skills. I mean, it's been again yet another event. It's been years since I last watched, but I'm assuming they get zanier and zanier by the year. So it's like you have to spin a plate on one hand while also dribbling and finding Bam Adebayo in a pick and roll situation or whatever is part of the event. So I'm sure Chris will do fine, I guess. I don't know. I think didn't Nikola Jokic win it one year? So it seems like it's pretty hit or miss as to who does well or what is an excelling skill. But this will be his chance to prove all of the hashtag haters wrong and really thread the needle with a cool pass in front of the entire nation to a hoop somewhere on the court. So it'll be cool, I'm guessing.
Kyle, any thoughts on Pat or Chris? Yeah, I think Pat's going to finish second or third.
Wow.
I don't know if Dwight Howard can still jump. The dude's old as hell. Is he still that great? I don't know. I can also see Aaron Gordon trying to do too much and get the title that he deserved back in the day. So I can just feel like those two are going to try too hard. And Pat Connaughton is just going to jump over some dudes. And because he's white, everyone's going to be like, oh, wow, this guy's jumping out of the gym.
That's a really good point. That's a super good point, actually. That's I love that.
Yeah, I'm looking at it through that eyes. In terms of the skills challenge, I don't know. I guess because what? You have to dribble, pass it. You have to do a bounce pass, a chest pass, hit a three, do some dribbling. And I mean, for some players, it's like slower than their normal game speed, but for Chris Middleton, it's exactly the pace that he goes anyway. So maybe he'll do well there. I don't know. Sure, I guess just don't be an embarrassment like he was in the 3-point shootout, I guess, is a win for him.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Now, as someone who has long been a viewer of the McDonald's Celebrity All-Star Game as well,
Oh
I would
yeah.
like to I would like to shout out Mr. Lasry for making another appearance in that one. I actually feel really bad that I haven't looked up the rosters yet. But obviously tune into that. Great representation for the Bucks all weekend. Thanks guys for playing along on the All-Star segments.
The one thing I want to say about the celebrity game, if there was ever going to be something that would get Michael Jordan to risk it all and have us all see what his current athletic state is, it would be the chance to suit up opposite of Lasry and really make those comments a couple weeks ago about, yeah, wow, that's great. Thanks for that. Make it pay with a couple of just spike those shots from Lasry. So if there's anything that's going to get us to see MJ suit up one last time, I want to give a shout out to Mark Lasry for trying to do it. I think the dude's playing again 8D chess as the Bucks want to do under the current regime.
Yeah, here's the lineup for
yeah let's run these down. Yeah.
Chance the Rapper, Quavo, Taylor Bennett, LaCroix Hawkins, Anthony Spice Adams, Mark Lasry, Ronnie 2K, Caitlin Owashi, I think that's how you mentioned it, Lil Ray Howery, Ajaya Wilson, Darius Miles, Coach Stephen A. Smith, Assistant Coach Guy Fieri. That team is going to wipe the floor against the opposition. And I think I recognize most of the names on this team. I don't like Taylor Bennett's the only one, and Leroyce Hawkins. Those are the only two where I look and I was like, I actually don't think I know who they are.
Well, Taylor Bennett is Chance's brother.
Oh.
But that's the only I don't know most of them.
Like I know Quavo's actually pretty good, so I'm not surprised there. Ajaya Wilson also really good in the WNBA. Darius Miles might have something in the tank. I don't know. But like Caitlin Owashi, she's really athletic, the gymnast who had that viral video. So who knows? I think this team should win as long as Chance the Rapper doesn't try too hard like he always does, both in rapping and basketball.
Here's the final note on the celeb game. Doesn't it seem strange that they don't get better celebrities for this? Like the NBA has all this pull and has all this cultural cachet. Not to like disrespect these celebrities or whatever. There are some like well-known people, but I'm routinely shocked they don't get even bigger names given like it's like a charity who gives a damn game. So maybe there's like really bad scheduling or celebrities don't want to get exposed or something.
I feel like they used to get big celebrities back in the day.
I wasn't watching, so I have no idea, but I'm gonna take your word for it.
I don't know. I just felt like back then they had like Justin Timberlake and Ice Cube and like Justin Bieber was there, Kevin Hart when he was at like his peak. I feel like they had like guys that were like guys and girls that were actually really popular at the time. I would say now, out of the celebrities that are there, Quavo's still relatively popular. Ronnie 2K, if you follow NBA 2K, then yeah, he's still pretty popular. But unless you really follow Latin music, you probably don't know who Bad Bunny is, and unless you watch the Super Bowl halftime and just learned who he was. But yeah, I feel like back then they had like celebrities at the peak of their popularity. Now it's kind of like, yeah, Chance the Rapper's there, I guess. Are we still? I don't know.
That's fair. Well, I would say this podcast has probably peaked in terms of
yeah, I would agree. Good for the 50th episode.
With the 50th episode. So let's move on and let's run through our miscellaneous stuff, guys. Kyle, you want to do rapid fire?
All right, yeah, I have a few questions. So the first one, do you plan on watching the XFL?
No.
I don't think so.
Okay. I'm contemplating. Maybe I'll just have it on as like background noise, but favorite book or book series growing up?
That's a good one. Do you have one off the top of your head, Adam?
Yeah, I have one that I'd like to cape up for. It's this book series, Warriors. It's about cats that would live out in the wilderness and like form clans and everything. By Aaron Hunter. I would highly recommend it to anyone interested in that very niche fantasy.
I don't have like a book series that jumps to mind because I read I'm not a weird kid, I swear, but I read like a lot of book about World War II and Nazi Germany. So just because history is interesting to me. But if I was to choose like a series of books, fiction wise, what's that young adult literature? It's like not cats, but it's like all the different mammals but it's like in a medieval world where they all like fight each other.
Redwall.
Yes, Redwall. Those are good books. I would shout out to Redwall. Those were always pretty compelling when I read those. If I was to choose like a fiction series.
That's fair. Mine was a series of unfortunate events. Love that series.
Those books are freaky. Those movies are freaky too.
The movies were weird. The show was bad, but the books, the books were also freaky. But I don't know. I enjoyed it. Biggest pet peeve.
Oh.
When people ask me to grade the All-Star draft. Just kidding. just joking. I don't know. I don't really get perturbed all that easily by a lot of people. Oh, I should shout out everybody who drives in Minnesota is just horrendous. So my pet peeve is Minnesota drivers because they must not have the education or the execution ability to follow road rules because it's rampant here in Minneapolis. So that's my daily pet peeve is I almost die every day on the roads.
I guess maybe mine can be road related too. People in potholes just open up randomly, like giant ones, like sinkholes randomly on the Philadelphia streets. So it always disrupts my ability to walk around.
I would say mine's also technically road related, but in the winter when it snows, and then you go the morning after, you clear your driveway, you put in 30 minutes at least, maybe an hour. You're manually shoveling or snow blowing. You're done. And then the snowplow finally comes through your neighborhood street because it's low priority and dumps all the snow at the end of your driveway. I hate it with a passion because then you have to go back out there and it's just the heavy clunks of snow. That is my new pet peeve. And the last question I had, Coke or Pepsi?
Coke.
Yeah, same.
Good answers.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going right at Kyle, your film review, A Blast from the Past.
Yes, it is Black History Month, so I'm just going to watch a lot of black movies. So the first one I'm going to go with is Black Panther, the superhero movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I had not watched it since Avengers Endgame came out, so I was kind of interested to see how that went. But overall, I would say it was a fun movie to watch just because you don't need to follow the whole Marvel universe to understand what's going on and to get, I mean, there's some inside jokes that you would pick up, but otherwise it's as its own standalone film. Very straightforward to watch. Love the music, love the soundtrack, and visually it's great. I think it's just the cast was fantastic, and it's a very solid movie, 7 out of 10. But I would personally give it a 10. But I can understand if people don't like it as much because, I mean, it's not like the most groundbreaking storyline. It's kind of like hero learns newfound powers and responsibilities. Villain comes in, wants a shot at the hero. Hero has to beat the villain. So it's not anything groundbreaking, but yeah, I would say 7 or 8 out of 10.
Wonderful. Solid 7 or 8 out of 10. That's a high recommendation. I don't know who hasn't seen Black Panther yet, but
I haven't.
It's good. Oh, there you go, Riley. It's a good suggestion.
I'll watch it during the All-Star game.
Okay. Okay, Riley. I think it's time for Vulture Talk.
I agree that it's time for Vulture Talk. Pretty quick, 2 quick ones here. We're going to revisit the Knicks because, like the rising and the setting of the Suns, we got to talk about the Knicks every week and some sort of connection to our good friend Masai Ujiri, which I don't know what the hell the name of the dude was who was supposedly running things for the Knicks was before, but he got canned this week. And they hired some other agent to be their president of something or another, or like, I don't know if he's going to be the GM. But because the spot cleared open, of course, they gave everybody an excuse to mention that Masai Ujiri could potentially go there for whatever reason. And the 2 shout-outs, actually, both of them come from the Bill Simmons podcast, or the BS podcast, whatever the hell it's called. Earlier in the week, he was talking about how if Masai Ujiri really wanted to like cement himself as one of the greatest executives ever, he would go to the Knicks and try to turn that around, which, okay, it's like everybody's arguments. Maybe, I don't know if Bill has any sort of ideas inside. The second one was, I believe, on Bill Simmons' trade deadline podcast. They were talking about how the key of whatever Miami was trying to do looked like they were potentially trying to keep the cap space open to go for Giannis in 2021 if he becomes a free agent. And the idea is you already have Jimmy Butler under contract, who's like your second guy. And then you have all the cap space. Miami's awesome, which no doubts there. Miami is an awesome city. So it's the usual, like Miami might have cap space, and because it's a cool city and LeBron went there once, maybe other guys will go there as well. So, two smaller vulture talks here, but again, just stoking the flames. I'm surprised Miami hasn't been. It's probably because of the cap situation, but I think we're going to probably see them ramping up a lot more over the next like 12 to 16 months to see, are they the destination that Giannis might choose? So two little vulture talk things, but nothing too consequential.
I'm glad you have such an antenna for that stuff. It's just impressive. So
it's actually really annoying because I have to submit myself to all that. But I got my ear to the ground when people start talking mess. Those vultures, I hear them. So I'm on it all the time.
Well, on behalf of all of us, we thank you for accepting all of that pain. All right, guys, let's look at the week ahead. Riley, you and I feel like we got a little egg on our faces for having a little more pessimistic look this past week for the games, but we have another chance here to redeem ourselves. So Monday the Bucks face the Kings, and then Wednesday they face the Pacers, and they are off for the All-Star break. So Riley, you could start. What's your prediction for this week?
I'm going to double down on the pessimism. No, I will say, man, I want to go look back and see how the Bucks did right before the All-Star break last year. I think they'll wax the Kings, and maybe I'll say they'll lose to the Pacers because the Pacers, well, I don't know, Oladipo looks really rusty. Maybe they'll go 2-0. Why not? Because Indiana's really trying to make Oladipo happen right now. It's not happening because he just came back from that knee injury, so it's like nobody's fault that that's the case. But it's a lot of Depot minutes in pretty critical situations. So I would say 2-0. Maybe they'll loaf around again on Wednesday because it's right before the break. But that's like the same for every team in the league. So Indiana will also have to fight the loafing-itis before the break. So we'll see how it goes. But 2-0.
Kyle?
I mean, they're playing the Kings, so that's an easy win. And yeah, I'll go 2-0. Easy win against the Kings. Indy might be interesting just to see how do they match up now that they have Oladipo, but I still think the Bucks will comfortably win. So 2-0. Go team.
Let's go Bucks. I'm going to go 2-0 as well. Perfect record across the board for these two W's. So we're going to call it, guys. Then the Bucks obviously will go on their All-Star break. We'll get to watch them in all the festivities this weekend, and then we will return with more games the following week. So make sure to follow us on Twitter at BrewHoop. Subscribe to the podcast, of course, if you haven't already. Share it with all your friends. Go to brewhoop.com for all of our coverage of this team. And thank you so much for sticking it out with us and listening to 50 episodes. For everyone that's been around this long, it's been quite a pleasure and a delight to be able to continue this to this point. And thanks for sticking around through this whole episode too, through the ups and downs of it. So talk to you again soon.